We would be honored if you would join us.
All right, everyone, welcome to the return episode of Dungeon Crawlers. That's right, we're back after we took a break. We'll just say that. We took a break. Scott is not with us tonight, but we have Alton.
Hello.
Those of you that don't know him, he's been on the show before. Talked about Paragon Games, talked about Dimensions, the awesome role-playing game that he was creator of, as well as so many other things. And then we have Krebs with us as well tonight. For those of you that don't know him, it may be because you haven't heard him for a while, because he was on the show way back when we were still at Epic Games and we talked about Palladium, and then he showed up again when Jared and them were with us. So it's been a while, but we're here to talk about Star Wars, the thing that we all love.
Some more than others, but everyone so much.
Yeah. We all have our levels. There's really low. There's like so low that they like Star Trek. There's medium.
I don't know. There are a lot of people who like Solo.
Yeah.
Well played.
That was good. Anyways, so we're going to talk about Rise of Skywalker, the latest in the franchise and the end of the Skywalker saga. Some have enjoyed it. Some have loved it. Some have hated it. Some thought it was the best we could get based on the last movie. And some just refused to go see it.
Some actually thought it was the worst in the 9-movie series, right?
Yeah, there are some people out there. So again, I'm just going to put this out there. Spoiler alert. If you are listening to the show and have not seen the movie and want to see the movie, turn it off. Go away. Go see the movie, then come back. Then listen to us. Because otherwise, we're going to spoil your breakfast.
We will have no filters.
It's true. And the other part that's really important to remember is if you have an opinion, it is valid. Just because we may state things eloquently or present information that you may not have thought of anymore doesn't necessarily mean that your opinion is any less worth it. This is our opinion and the way that we view things. So
yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely one thing I always stress, and we have always stressed on the show. This is our opinion. Don't take our word for it. Well, sort of take our word for it, but don't base everything off of it. Go to the movie, enjoy it, and if you don't like it, that's okay. We're not going to hate you. Like it, that's okay. We're not going to hate you. We're still going to like you. We're still going to like you if you hate it. Everyone has their own opinion, and that's the awesome thing about pop culture. Some people like Star Wars. Some people like Star Trek. I'm not one of those. Some people like Terminator. Some people like, Spaceballs. I definitely like that one. You got your Galaxy Quest fans. You got your Harry Potter fans. I'm not one of those. You got all sorts of fandom.
We'll explore that in another episode. I noticed you mentioned Galaxy Quest is not on your list. We're not going to get into it now, but I am curious.
I did say Galaxy Quest. I love Galaxy Quest. I
love Galaxy Quest. But let us not derail.
Yeah.
Let us not derail. So I've actually been really curious. I know how I feel about the film, but of course I hold your opinions in high regard. Daniel, where do you sit on this? This movie has been, I can't deny that this movie is super divisive in terms of the audience reaction, the fandom reaction. Where do you fall in this metaphoric civil war?
The metaphoric civil war. I'm definitely on the side of for the movie. I enjoyed it. I really did. I liked it. It did a good job. J.J. Abrams did a good job with what he had. Coming in from Last Jedi, he was able to wrap the story up using the pieces he had, the story arc he had, and was able to deliver the best story he could. Now, with that said, I also know there was some meddling on behalf of Disney, which we probably didn't get the full J.J. Abrams movie. So I do know that they've kind of announced that the DVD Blu-ray that's coming out will have the J.J. Abrams director's cut, which I'm interested to see how that turns out.
Very interesting.
I know we've seen Colin Trevor's script, Duel of the Fates. Well, not full script, but kind of the built-up outline of the script. Looked interesting. I don't know if I could buy into that film, but that's okay. We got a different film. I enjoyed it. It had some ups, it had some downs, it had some good points, it had some what moments, but it had a lot. Overall, it had a lot of good moments, I would say. Now I'm going to leave it at that, and we can go into it further, because otherwise I'll just keep rambling.
Elton, where do you fall in all of this?
So I have a slightly more nuanced, not necessarily negative, but I definitely lean more towards neutral on the film itself. Basically, in my mind, you have to take a couple of things into account. The first is, what is the question you're actually asking? Are you saying among all of the Star Wars films? Are you saying as an independent film in a vacuum? Are you saying as part of the new trilogy? And I think each of those deserves a slightly different answer. Star Wars in particular is one that a lot of people feel extremely passionately about, especially theorists around the theory of story crafting, of storytelling, filmmaking, editing, writing, the whole nine yards. And so everybody has their own kind of information and nuance on it. But for a lot of people, their first real exposure to the hero's journey is the original Star Wars. And so a lot of people base a lot of their theories around what a Star Wars film should be around a lot of those theory elements. And so it's interesting to watch as those evolve over time, and just the way that not only Star Wars itself, but the film industry, how stories are told, and what is more important to an audience of today than 40 years ago. All of those things have evolved too. That doesn't necessarily mean that the way that it was handled was perfect, or that I agree with a lot of things. But nevertheless, we do have to be able to keep those types of understandings in mind, that for each person, what episode 9 means is going to be slightly different. And for the first generation of kids who have only ever grown up seeing 7, 8, 9, there is a lot of good things that came out of a very disorganized 7 and 8.
Yeah. All right. So, Krebs, your turn.
I think I'm going to come at this from my perspective comes from being a Star Wars child of the 80s. The first movie I ever remember seeing in theaters was Return of the Jedi in 1983. And that really sort of formed my taste, my love for certain flavors of mythos and so on. And then I also come from, for those who don't know, I also used to be a film student, and I'm an independent film actor, and on top of the other things that I do for a living. That said, I went into Star Wars 9 having only seen the first teaser and the first full-length trailer, and then I purposely put myself on a sort of a moratorium of any other trailers so I could go in with as little knowledge as possible. And I gotta tell you, I super loved this movie. I will tell you right now that I don't think it's perfect. I will tell you right now that there are areas where we could, the fandom could step in, rewrite 2 or 3 scenes, or 2 or 3 kinds of or maybe just 2 relationships, and it would actually exponentially improve the film in those regards. But as a standing product right now, I actually very much loved the film. I saw it more than once, and it was worth it every time. And in terms of the new trilogy, as a whole, like you were speaking about this, Elton, as a 3-film epic, if you will, I am not displeased with the end product. I know it's not what we necessarily expected. I know it probably could have been better in terms of organization, if we're going to talk about that. But as a story, start to finish, I felt it was a rather consummate story, and I was satisfied as a Star Wars fan. And it most certainly surpassed any experience I had with the prequel trilogy. The original trilogy will always be my favorite. But this new trilogy spoke to that Star Wars kid inside of me. And at 41 years old, I felt like a kid again. And that's not hyperbole. It was a wonderful childlike experience with a story that I love.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if anything, I mean, it is, all 3 films were good in respect. If you look at them as films, they were good. I would say the most fundamental flaw of all the films is the fact that there is no cohesive story arc. There wasn't going into this. It was kind of this, oh, hey, we're going to put the story arc in at the end type thing. Even, if you don't like the prequels or the original trilogy, there are some quirks, but each trilogy had a overall story of what was happening. The prequels, we had the rise of Anakin falling to the dark side and becoming Vader. That was the overall story arc with the Clone Wars and everything built in with that. The original trilogy, we had Luke growing, becoming a Jedi, and then saving his father from the dark side.
It was the hero's journey with a subplot of redemption.
Yeah, and then but you go into 7, 8, and 9, and there wasn't that. It was the weirdest thing. That is the only thing that bugs me the most out of all these films. Yes, it kind of sucked what happened with Luke, but even then, I'm still okay with the story we had, because there's no way we could have the awesome Luke we had in the extended universe, because let's face it, Mark Hamill was way too old when they filmed these to be able to get those epic scenes that we saw in those books. But with that said, again, the biggest failure was the fact there was no story arc from the beginning when they started out. We had separate directors and separate writers, and it didn't seem like anyone was cohesively working together.
And you know what? At the risk of sounding like an apologist, which is a term I hate, by the way, at the risk of sounding like an apologist, one of the things that just occurred to me as you were mentioning the EU is that, the extended universe was being written for decades. And then when Disney assumed responsibility for the Star Wars franchise, it seemed, in retrospect, I can see how they may have had those conversations of, okay, we have to please the fan base, we have to tell a great story, and we can't do it in a way that's predictable. Therefore, we can't lean on the EU. And so you have decades of content that basically qualifies as we can't use this. And to that end, with the story that they gave us, kudos to them for finding at least some threads that were unique compared to the EU that still dovetailed into the original mythos. And that's not going to be an easy task in this case. So again, I'm not saying it's perfect. The Last Jedi, I'm sure we could pick apart more than any of the other films in the trilogy. But if we look at how do they develop the character of Rey, what were the grand anagnorises? What were the, as an audience, where did we find catharsis and things like that? They still found ways to meet the audience's emotional needs without falling into the trap of, oh, I saw that coming, I expected that, I've read this before.
Yeah. And, to that effect, it's really interesting when we consider the EU as a collective whole, because it really, really, really wasn't. When we talk about that expanded universe, a lot of times the first name that comes to mind is Timothy Zahn, who had a very strong writing style. He had a very good grasp of what was going on, not only in terms of the micro to his story, but the macro of what else is happening in the galaxy, what else is happening in the cosmos, and how do we make sure that all of those events play into each other in a way that makes sense. The world building aspects there were really good, where he took all of those different threads that Lucas had done and he added to them in a way that was very logical, right? Yeah. But that doesn't mean that every single book, every single comic, every single offshoot in the expanded universe has that golden seal that we often associate with the stories that stand out in our mind.
I agree with you.
So where Disney had to take that collective whole and say, okay, these things directly contradict, or they don't make sense in the context of the story, or this thing started with this person and then Zahn took it and actually turned it into something good. Like, there comes a point where, to the one person who had that one book that they absolutely loved, the one scene that was really important to them, there is no possible way that Disney could have created something that was cohesive, that made sense, and that still hit all of those notes for every single person. Yeah. And so it is important to remember that there is some context there. We have a lot of expectations and decades of good feelings, of a hit and a miss here, but overall, these big pillars, these cornerstones that still worked generally, but because they were read in our voice in the theater of our own mind, they played out in a way that very possibly nobody else saw but us.
That is absolutely fair.
Yeah.
If I could dovetail on that too, I've been thinking for several weeks now, actually a couple months now, where I've been wondering, like, where does the vitriol come from? I actually came across an article. I don't know if you saw this, but there was an article that was titled "Why the Rise of Skywalker Was Destined or Doomed to Be the Worst Star Wars Ever." And I thought, wow, do you hear that hyperbole? Like they're shoving, they are saying that the Rise of Skywalker is worse than midi-chlorians and little baby Anakin, right? Like, they're saying that that's worse than episode 1. And I obviously, if you can't hear it, I obviously have some opinions about that. But what's interesting to me is, to Alton's point about, like, there's no way that Disney could have magically met the demands of all fans. And I think this is a great case in point. When The Force Awakens came out, the number one criticism that I saw amongst many online pundits was The Force Awakens is A New Hope just with other people, right? Like, it follows, they said it's too much like the original film, it's too much like the original Star Wars in 1977. And then one of the initial massive criticisms I saw of The Rise of Skywalker is it's nothing like the original trilogy. It's nothing like we hoped for and all stuff. And I'm like, hold on a second. Did you just say that the first movie in the trilogy was bad because it was just like the trilogy, and the third movie was bad because it wasn't like the trilogy? I mean, how are we supposed to win here? And so that definitely came to mind. I have this whole theory that the power of social media propagating negativity has actually planted seeds of toxicity in the general audience, and people go in expecting to hate instead of allowing themselves to love. And I think that that's where not all, but quite a bit of negative review of this trilogy as a whole really stems from. It's this toxicity that we can find online so very easily.
Yeah, I mean, look back to when you were a kid, when we were kids, actually. You know, how did you find out about movies? It was through going to other movies, seeing trailers, or seeing a commercial. You know, that was it. You know, I don't ever remember watching, any movie reviewers at Siskel and Ebert, or I guess that's who the big ones were back then. You know, I never watched any of that stuff. You know, we went to go see a movie because, we saw this really cool trailer, wanted to go see it. Now it's everywhere. It's on YouTube. It shows up on Facebook. Like, I scroll through my Facebook feed and, like, it's like Rise of Skywalker thing after thing. So we get bombarded by it. And then not only that, anyone and everyone can make a comment about it. Oh, that movie sucked, or that was horrible, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, what kind of a fan base are we when we are so horrible in what we say about an actor's portrayal of a certain character that they have to get off of social media? I mean, that happened with Kelly Tran, with her character.
It happened with
Rose.
Adam Driver. Do you remember the reaction to the reveal of Kylo Ren?
Oh, yeah.
And he got lambasted for being a moon-faced pretty emo boy.
Yeah.
But then by the operation of the second or third film, Adam Driver is nominated for Oscars now, right? I mean, he's in Oscar award-winning performances, and it ends up he's an incredible actor. But initially, the reaction was, oh, this is pathetic.
Yeah.
And now faithful consumers of social media listening to our commentary on this film, allow me to spread some toxic seeds of dissension.
Yes, do it.
We have gone far too long defending this film, and now it's my opportunity. No, that's not where I'm coming from. Okay, so
quietly into the night.
There are many, many wonderful things about this film. And again, if it hasn't been stressed already, if you haven't seen it, go see it, form your own opinion.
Please.
However, there are also problems. Some of them are things that are within just the film itself. Some of them are results from the last minute editing and meddling from Powers on High. And others were seeds from 7 and 8, where there was disagreement and disorganization and things that created problems that were, if not necessarily unsolvable, at least not elegantly solvable. It is still very much to JJ's credit that he was able to pull it together the way that he did, all things considered.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Meddling included. But there are also some issues. And so, like, I do want to open that up too, is like, what are some of the things that you believe are systemic issues specifically within 9?
Issues? I mean, first
specifically
off,
in 9, yeah.
I mean, I would say, like, there is no, okay, when you read a story, generally by the end of the story, you're like, oh, wow, I now see all the breadcrumbs that were put there. By the time I got through 9, I'm like, okay, I can see the breadcrumbs, but you're really stretching for those breadcrumbs. It wasn't like, whoa, man, that just blew my mind, because now I see this breadcrumb and that breadcrumb and that whole trail that led up to this point. Again, that's because there wasn't that overall story arc. Exegol, where did that come from? No one has ever heard of Exegol, but suddenly it's this big, huge Sith stronghold, and there's so many Sith followers that they can build this massive fleet and crew this massive fleet. How did the Emperor survive? We don't know. It's magic. What? Let alone he created Snoke. Yeah, we see some clone bodies of Snoke floating around in a tube. No explanation. Those things, as a storyteller, kind of bug you. As a moviegoer, I'm able to set those aside because I enjoyed it. They still made a logical way to make this work. That one's a big thing. Then how the crap is, I don't care if Rey is a Palpatine. How the crap is she like this uber Jedi person that seems even stronger than Anakin Skywalker ever was? And she has no training. Anakin had tons of training. I don't get it. That's the thing that is, she's like the MacGuffin sonic screwdriver from Doctor Who in the Star Wars universe, it seems like.
Yeah. And one of the things, I mean, and this is part of what informs my opinion on why I say that 9 is an okay movie. It's still good. I still have a fun time. Yeah. I can still go in and enjoy it. But part of the reason that I'm able to enjoy it is because I've done the research. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like, there are things, even in the questions that you just asked, that have been explained in the expanded universe. But if I have to read a book in order to go to a movie to understand what's going on, the filmmaker has fundamentally failed. You're right. The story, even though we should always be able to have the option to add on and go deeper and understand things, or there's nuances or Easter eggs, or, if you knew more of the backstory, then this would be even cooler. That's okay. But if you can't understand key elements of the story because you don't have the information inside the film itself, yeah, you're failing. That is a fundamental failing. That does not mean that the entire movie as a whole is crap and falling apart, but it does mean that things like the Force Dyad, which we now know in the expanded universe, as she was connected to Kylo Ren across all those years, some of what he was learning and capable of doing was transferring to her, and that when they bonded in 7 and 8, some of those powers got even more turned up and amped to 11 so that she could have them. Like, the casual moviegoer or the first-time Star Wars watcher walks in and goes, what? The fact that the opening 2 words of the title scroll are Palpatine lives. Explain that to somebody who hasn't seen anything but 7, 8, and 9. What does that mean? That means literally nothing, and there is no weight to that for the rest of the film. And so you start to have these things.
Or let alone, how does the Dyad heal the Emperor? I mean, he's like this weird, funky, deformed corpse, and now suddenly he's healed? What? There are some weird things, and I do believe that was kind of part of Disney's meddling, but I mean, that's the same problem I had with the TV series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, the first couple of seasons, you had to see all the other movies to understand, like, key elements, like, suddenly Hydra is in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. Well, if you hadn't seen, the second Captain America movie, you wouldn't know why. They make reference to what happened in Thor 2. Again, without seeing Thor 2, you wouldn't know. It's just, those things kind of bug me. If we would have had someone behind the scenes controlling the overall arc, like we did in the previous prequels, the prequel and the original trilogy, sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied, I think we would have had those things. Having Rian Johnson come in and do 8, you know, he is a good filmmaker. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he was the right fit for Star Wars. You know, Knives Out, fantastic movie. Some of his other stuff, fantastic. Star Wars, I literally felt like, and again, I could be completely wrong, but I felt like him and Kathleen Kennedy said, we don't care what you as fans think. We're going to do whatever we want. You know, and you see that from the very beginning of that movie where Luke is handed this saber and he just tosses it over his shoulder like, who cares? And it just,
it was a simple gag that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It sort of betrayed, in the more literal sense, it betrayed the gravitas of what the original trilogy and the original story had established.
Yeah, I mean, it was a giant middle finger to every fan out there, because we built this up. We're looking for Luke. Luke is this legendary Jedi that's missing, and everyone. I mean, Luke Skywalker.
We made you wait 2 years for this moment.
Yeah, I mean, Luke Skywalker to me has always been this amazing hero that was able to not only succeed when adversity. I mean, he screwed up. We saw him screw up in Empire. And he overcame that. He became a Jedi. He saved his friend from the Hutt Lord, jumping from skiff to skiff over the Sarlacc pit, and all this craziness. And then still is able to redeem his father and turn from the dark side and still remain a Jedi. Amazing, amazing thing. And then we go through this whole story. We meet these new characters, and at the very end, we lose a friend in that journey. But at the very end, you see Luke Skywalker, and he has this look, and it pans, and then it's over, and you're like, no! And then you get to this movie that you've waited another 2 years for, and he throws the saber away, and it's just like moment after moment of like, what happened to my best friend? He's now become this grouch that I can't even recognize, and I just don't understand anymore. And why?
Yeah. And the thing is like there were very easy ways to fix 8. Like there are things that you can do in fewer than 5 minutes of film without fundamentally changing any of the major plot points, without needing to do huge reshoots. It's something that I've even considered doing a little bit of my own monkey editing and, you know, just throwing it out there for people to see, and maybe they can get Hamill back in time to reshoot before he passes. But, you know, it's just, yeah.
Well, and the funny thing is they did do lots of reshoots. So what was it before all those reshoots? I mean, I don't know. And, you know, there's a lot of things we can't change. You know, Carrie Fisher passed shortly after that, so I know that dramatically changed what 9 was going to be. But with that said, I think we've all kind of hit it on the head. Abrams took that kind of mess that was there in 8, which still was a good movie. Don't get me wrong. It was an enjoyable movie. It wasn't quite what I wanted, but it still felt like Star Wars. There was a few weird components. Holdo maneuver can't exist. Hyperspace you jump into a pocket dimension. You don't hit anything. Obviously, we saw that in the beginning of 9. You know, he's light speed skipping. Otherwise, he would have been crashing into things like crazy. I'm sorry. Yeah. And the only thing I can think of is she dropped out of light speed after she got a boost, and that's what caused the disaster. Who knows? And they don't even explain that. They just they even put a nod to that in 9. It's like, yeah, that's just not feasible. They could have taken out the Separatists like crazy. Throw some clones and some ships, light speed into them, boom. You know,
or vice
the
versa.
Army would be over. Yeah. However, it's kind of there were some really pivotal moments that I thought were good in 9. You know, at the end, it was really cool seeing all those ships come in. It was amazing seeing the Ghost in there, the Shadowcaster. I swear I could be wrong, but I swear I saw Boba Fett's ship in there.
Slave One?
Yeah.
Well, it's possible.
Or at
least another of that ilk, right? I mean,
yeah, it could be a fire spray. It just happens to be a random fire spray. It could be. But it was cool seeing those things. I wish R2 was in the movie more. That is another huge gripe I have of this trilogy. R2, where are you? Literally, my favorite droid in the we get a knockoff BB-8. I'm sure I'm gonna get hate mail for that. People love BB-8. I don't. I'm not a fan of BB-8. And we get DO. Who cares? Why did we get DO? We should have had R2 there.
For the DO ex machina?
Yeah. Probably.
Oh, well played. Oh, that was clever wordplay.
But I do like some of the things that JJ hid. I don't know if any of you noticed. I've seen the movie more than 10 times. But when in the scene with Boba Frick and he's working on 3PO, as you're looking around the room, if you notice in the background, he has a battle droid in the back. One of the super battle droids is sitting in the back. The big, dark, gray, bulky ones. I noticed that like the second time I watched it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a Clone War battle droid. That is awesome. So I like JJ's attention to detail where he has those minute little things that are kind of in there. They're like, okay, I'm connecting back to the old, the prequels and the original trilogy there. We didn't get any of that with Rian Johnson. I feel like there was nothing in there. It was as sterile as could be.
And so, like, I know Krebs has been super, super hot on this film. So I'm really curious to see, like, what are some of your favorite parts?
If I don't mean to unwind this a little bit, but I didn't get a chance to weigh in on what I thought was what were shortcomings, right?
Okay, yeah. Start with that and move in, yeah.
And I don't think I'm going to have super profound ones per se, because I've been playing with this experiment of when someone says something negative about the film, can I reinterpret it to see how that was actually a benefit to the story, right? And most of the time I can do it, but there are certain things that I think were squandered. For example, to Alton's point earlier, I'm sure everybody who cares enough to look this up has seen the articles that talk about how the thing that Finn wanted to tell Rey was that he believed he was force sensitive, which is a very interesting expression when you're inside the universe, right? Is that really what they would say? Would a non-Jedi or a non-force related or attuned individual refer to someone else as force sensitive, or would they say they have a connection with the force, right? Like that, just that verbiage. But allegedly, well, I shouldn't say allegedly, J.J. Abrams has confirmed that what Finn wanted to say was that he's force sensitive. Now, to me, that was a huge squander, because, or rather, it was almost a bait and switch.
Yeah. So, and there are so many ways that he could have expressed it too. It doesn't even necessarily need to be the words "I'm force sensitive," Ray. It could be like,
right, exactly.
I saw Luke, or I interacted with Leia, or
Yeah, I'm going to jump in real quick. So they're going to be releasing an extended version, and then the director's cut. But there was a scene that was cut out. So when they're on that Star Destroyer, and that door or the hatch is locked.
Mm-hmm.
There was a scene that was deleted, and he actually used the Force to pry that open.
Are you talking about episode 8?
In 9.
In 9.
Instead of BB-8 coming up and unlocking that hatch, it was actually Finn. There was a moment of stress, and he reaches out and he pops it open with the Force.
See, that would have been huge.
That would have been, because they were hinting at it. He's like, I know Rey's okay. I mean, we got those hints that he's force sensitive, which I think we needed to see that. I mean, that's kind of the hint that we were given when he was wielding the lightsaber. And I wish they would have done some of those things where we would have seen, okay, we know where Finn's going. That's why he was able to wield that lightsaber.
So
and
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so even then, like, that would have been a great lead to introduce the concept of a Force dyad, and then let that be a twist to be like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, Finn and Rey, they're doing this thing. They're clearly both exhibiting powers. They've both held Luke's lightsaber, so okay, yeah, things are starting to come together. We see him starting to express these powers, and then it's Ren, like, yeah. That would have set up the idea of what is a Force dyad in a beautiful way without giving any of that, and add more weight to this concept of, like, polar opposites, and yeah, you guys have got to figure this one out. That would have just been mwah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad that you told us about that scene. However, in the attitude of constructive criticism here, this goes back to what Alton was saying about, like, in terms of storytelling and delivery. In The Force Awakens, they gave us plenty of nonverbal cues that Finn had a more than platonic interest in Rey, and they reinforced those things in Episode 8, where he is obviously more than platonically interested in Rey's welfare and well-being, even when he's with Rose, who also has a more than platonic interest in Finn, right?
Yeah.
Which is clearly expressed in 8. And then we get to 9. Everyone is friend zoned, and everyone is okay with being in the friend zone. And Finn wants to tell Rey something, and it's the Chekhov's gun principle, right? If we look at the trilogy as Acts 1, 2, and 3, in Act 1, we started this notion of Finn is attracted to Rey or cares for her in a way that's more than platonic.
They have a connection.
They have a connection, right? And so, and then we get to the third movie, and instead of Chekhov's gun going off, it's just a butter knife, and he just wanted to let you know he's got some spread, right? Like, there's no rhyme or reason to why we shifted gears in that way. And in the absence of that scene that you're speaking of, it does not play as well. I do agree that, like, later on when Finn says Rey is okay, I can feel it. That is the most obvious expression of that connection to the Force where Finn is concerned. And then later on when JJ confirms it outside of the film using the power of the interwebs, then it helps more pieces fall into place. But if I were stuck in a bunker and all I had were movies on Blu-ray and I was watching them on my TV, how would I ever know that was the intent of those moments? And why is he trying to talk to her like he's a 12-year-old boy going through puberty, trying to talk about something really embarrassing, right? Like, I'm going through changes, Rey, and I just want to tell you privately so that other people can't hear me say it. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to that either.
For the record, if you sound that way, take no offense. Krebs is just making a point.
I'm also mocking Sid the Sloth. No, but but anyway, so that was a built-up character connection that I felt was ultimately squandered by shifting direction and poor exposition. Something else that I thought was a poor element to the film is when Rey accidentally destroys the prisoner transport, and she's convinced Chewie is on there. Initially, her reaction is fairly believable, but then they get on the ship and they fly away, and she's like, wow, yeah, I can't believe I did that. Hey, let's do something else, guys. And it's just like there's this lack of, she felt like Han was like a father to her, and she was crushed when he was killed, and that was clear. And Chewie is her co-pilot for all the years leading up to this point, and she accidentally kills one of her best friends. She accidentally puts to an end, or she believes she did. And in the next 5 minutes, she's like, we're going to have to do a different plan, guys. It's time for a different heist. And it's just like, why isn't anyone crushed that Chewie died? Later on, they get Chewie. Chewie finds out that Leia dies. And I don't know about you guys, but I had a genuine tears in the eyes, emotional reaction to Chewbacca lamenting the passing of Leia, especially in the context of Han is dead, Leia is dead, and to Chewie, Ben is dead, right? Yeah. That guy's physical acting had way more emotion in it than people who had dialogue.
He's a guy in a fursuit, and sure, he had a 40-year head start, but
well, I mean, so here's another thing that really stuck out. I went and saw it again. You bring out this point, okay? So there's a scene where they are on a planet, and she can tell that Chewie is alive up on the Star Destroyer that is up in the upper atmosphere. Why the crap couldn't she do that after she blew up the craft, knowing that he wasn't on that? even after she calmed down. Even after she calmed down.
I could argue that because at that point, she first of all, Ben, Kylo, however you want to call him, allegedly was emotionally manipulating her. He refers to it later as "I was pushing you," right? But we also know that secretly Palpatine was in the mix between the two of them. He was facilitating this channel. It would not be hard for Palpatine, with all that immense power, albeit we don't know where that comes from necessarily, is manipulating them and shielding them. And he needs her to feel that loss and that anger and that sadness, because that's the dark side.
That makes sense. Now, the other question I have is, where the crap does this ability to be able to yank things out of the fabric of time come from? I mean, seriously. He's able to rip a necklace off. Vader's helmet falls at his feet. They're able to transfer a lightsaber. As cool as it was, but it was kind of like this, what?
Look, it was cool. It was totally cool. And Elton, I can tell you've got an opinion on this. If I can just throw this in really fast, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
Go for it.
On the one hand, I was talking to some other people about this just this week, and my statement to them was, just because in a story or in a movie they use the Force in a way you've never seen doesn't mean they're wrong. The Force is this energy that binds everything together. Why couldn't it also have the ability to do what we're talking about? And even whether or not that's possible, what I will say is, in terms of storytelling, they did an excellent job, and they followed a very classic formula for this. I get it, but JJ did a great job of establishing that it was possible. And unlike the whole Finn, I'm Force sensitive thing, he actually paved a very clear path to everything from I ripped this necklace to the broken artifacts and Vader's helmet to the lightsaber transfer, so that it made sense when it happened.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to throw that in there. Alton, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, we start to get into nitpicky and, like, why wasn't this explained? Why isn't that explained? And I'm not trying to brush over any of those things, but I love Krebs's analogy of pulling out the butter knife and rubbing margarine over everything. It's one of those things where we find ourselves a lot of times in 9 asking that fundamental question. I can't believe it's not plot point. Like, there are things that are oftentimes set up but never explained, and then there are other things that are dependent upon some of the things that are explained, but it doesn't, like, there's just weird inconsistencies there. Again, like, if you're able to just go in and eat your popcorn and have a good time, like, that's just fine. But one of the things that Star Wars fans particularly enjoy is this idea of a cohesive universe that's built and understandable and that follows rules. Even if writers break plot points, those rules are always addressed in some official way or another. And that the mainline things, there's always the precedent, the understanding, and that if a Force power appears, it isn't that Deus Ex Machina, pull it out of the backhand and suddenly something crazy happens, with few exceptions, but for the most part, it's, but in this, it felt like it was just happening. Every single film, there was another thing that just kept happening. And the pieces were there to be able to explain a lot of stuff. And it just wasn't taken advantage of.
I mean, I threw this out here because I know the answer. I just wanted to hear your opinion, because I don't know if any of you...
It's that external stuff, right?
You're right. Well, yeah. If you haven't seen Star Wars Rebels, you wouldn't know. I don't know if you remember the Loth wolves that we saw towards season 3 and 4. They have the ability to move through space and time. It is an ability of the Force. What I think Ben and Rey are tapping into is that same thing. They are moving things through the Force, through hyperspace, so to say, from one point to another. And that's exactly what those wolves were doing. So I think that's what they tapped into. It just wasn't really explained well.
I could get behind that.
Yeah, but as far as overall, I know we're nitpicking. Overall, the story was fantastic. It definitely was fantastic. There were fantastic moments that you're just like, wow, that what was said was poignant. That what was said really fits into something I can relate to. Especially the moment where Finn is like, we're alone, guys. It's at the end battle. No one came. It's a replay of Crate. And then you hear Lando look up, and you just see all these ships. It's do. You're not alone.
Lando's all fantastic. On your left.
Yeah, because and previously that was set up in the movie. Zori saying that's how the Empire wins. They make you feel alone. That's something we can all relate to.
Absolutely.
That's how bullies make bullies or Satan. If you're religious or whatever, you can fit that into any way. And I do love those poignant moments. Even when we see Luke finally, and he lifts up the X-wing, and he's got this look like, hey man, I finally got it. This is awesome. If only Master Yoda were here. There were some really good moments. It was an entertaining story. I like what they did with Carrie Fisher as best they could. Yes, it was a little hokey pokey, but it still flowed as best you could with what they had.
Absolutely.
And had a great story.
Connecting to what you're saying there, Elton was asking earlier, he was like, what was like a gem moment? Like, what moment stood out to you as a wonderful and positive thing? Because we just spent some time criticizing, which is a healthy thing to do. So and I definitely want all three of us to answer that question. For me, the scene, the thing in the movie that made the movie for me in its entirety was that moment between Ben and Han.
Yes.
That even now while I'm talking about it, I mean, we're doing the podcast, so I'm trying to keep myself composed, but I cannot deny that I have a genuine emotional reaction to that exchange, even as I think about it now. That scene was so well written and superbly executed by both Harrison Ford and Adam Driver. It was such a short moment in the film. Maybe, I don't know, 3 minutes tops. And yeah. I think it was less than that. Yeah. But that interaction, the things they said and the things they communicated, two different statements there, were just so precious and so genuine. And it changed everything for me.
And the editing and the directing and everything that went into that scene, that... to me, I very, very much agree that was worth waiting for, and that was worth showing up to see. There are other things that I wish that had gone farther and that had more of that type of quality, but that scene alone, if you haven't seen the film, just do it.
No, I mean, so, reckoning back to 7, there are two really critical points between Ben and Han. In episode 7, we see that critical moment where he's wavering between dark and light. And then he makes that choice. You see that red light go over his face, that choice to go to the dark side. There's the end of Han. You haven't seen 7? Yeah, guys, it's been a long time. But then we come back on the flip side, and there's this pivotal moment. Again, he's in the light. And I think it's fantastic that they brought Harrison back for this moment, because here are two pivotal moments. One where he fell to the dark side, now one where he knows he needs to go to the light, but he doesn't know how. And we have this fantastic dialogue between father and son, even though the father isn't really there. It's the son's memory of him and that. But it was beautiful. It was well done. And I don't know if you can be a father without feeling tears or having emotions swell up inside of you, or you don't even have to be a father, just having nieces and nephews. There's just something powerful about that moment. And I love it, especially like, I don't know what to do, or I know what to do, but I don't know if I can do it. And he's like, you can, even the fact he's like, Kylo Ren died. My son's still alive. I mean, there's just some really cool things. And then to wrap it all up in a beautiful bow, to have him say, Dad, and then Harrison just goes, I know. That was wonderful. It beckons back.
It gave me chills just now.
Yeah. It's just a beautiful scene. I love how they did that. And again, that the credit goes to JJ for putting that in there, because I don't think we could have had a better redemption moment with Ben without Han being there.
Credit, and I don't know who is in the writing room, so credit to whoever wrote the scene, credit to JJ for putting it in, and then credit for everybody down the line to executing it to perfection, because and that's really the kind of the, and I'm sure you've got your other scene too, Daniel, but I'm going to digress for a second. But this is the fundamental theme of Star Wars to me, and why I think that it speaks to many people, though it is particularly poignant to me, is that concept that we all go through struggles. We all have temptations and things that get in our way. We all have moments of weakness, of fear, where we think that we're not good enough, or we don't know what the next step is. And Star Wars, regardless of anything else that's going on in this story, has always consistently shown we choose our path. You have the power to change. No matter how far you go, there's always a way back. There's always a way forward. And even if you can't change what happened, you can change yourself and what you do from here forward. And that's just such a beautiful thing. And it was something I was worried wasn't going to be present in this trilogy in the way that it deserves to be. And again, in my opinion, but to be able to get to that point in the film, I got a little emotional, and then I breathed a sigh of relief and was able to just be there.
Yeah. I mean, it's those moments that I really feel like help us to just enjoy the film and say, okay, I can get behind this. I can enjoy this. One of the big, I kind of hearkened a little bit to the poignant point, but mine was, that moment with Zori on top where, he's like, yeah, we had this big battle. No one came. We're alone in this. And she just looks at him and goes, that's how they win, to make you feel alone. That's just something I can use in my life in several places. Depression, anxiety, you isolate yourself. You don't do it on purpose, but you start isolating yourself and you start feeling alone. And that's when people have a lot of their issues. And I felt those things before as well. And it is true. Isolation is the worst. You kind of start shutting down more and more and more. So the fact that came out, I'm like, wow, that's a really cool mental health note. That's a really cool thing that I can use to remember, whatever it is that's trying to fight against me, it wins when I feel alone. So that's where you connect. We be more social. We go find a giant army to fly in at the last moment to rescue us. The other really cool point in the movie that I really, really enjoyed, that I wish we got to see more of, was that moment when she's laying down and we hear all those Jedi's voices talking and speaking out and telling her to get up and rise up. But there's one pivotal moment when Anakin's speaking and he's like, bring balance to the Force like I did. I heard there is in the extended edition that we'll be releasing, that there is a scene, a version of that scene where you see those Force ghosts appear behind her. So she rises up, she has the saber, she's charging forward towards Palpatine, and they're behind her, lending her power. I think that would be so much cooler to see. But it's still, I really like that, where they're speaking to her and giving her courage to stand up and still fight.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. As you were talking about that, I agree with you. That's a huge life lesson. And I would dare stamp it with, that's a universal truth, that your opposition, whether you consider it spiritual, mental, physical, whatever the case may be, it wins by convincing you you're alone. But what I love that you pointed out is that when they realized they weren't alone, they realized just how not alone they were. There was a massive fleet coming to the rescue. And even when this has been my experience in life and watching my students and trying to help other people through some difficult times, even when you feel alone, what you don't realize is there's a fleet of people who want to support you and love you and want to be there, even when you don't feel like that's the case.
Correct. Yeah. No, and that's another really cool thing. When all those ships pull up, and they're like, "Whoa, when did they get a fleet?" And the guy's like, "I just think it's people with ships."
Yeah.
It's just people. And
it's
I
people
think
who showed up.
Yeah, and I think that's point. Sometimes we have to ask. Sometimes we forget to ask. We feel so alone, no one's there for us, but we forget sometimes they're busy and we just need to ask for help. So if anything, remember that. Hey, do we get one of those cool, now moments, like on the old cartoons?
The star arcing over the head. The more you know.
Yes. But no, we're pretty close out of time. I think we've talked a lot about this. There is a lot more we could probably delve into with this. We may do a part 2 where we bring Scott on, because I do know Scott has a very opposite opinion of this film.
Absolutely,
than
he
we
does.
Do. Scott will hit it from, I'm sure, being a cinematic person, director and story writer as well. But let's kind of real quickly, because we got about 4 minutes left, kind of give a letter grade and why. Who wants to go first?
I will gladly go first, because I think that you guys will balance me out a little bit. Looking at 9, both as a standalone film and ultimately as the end of a saga and its own trilogy all at once, I would have to give it a letter grade of an A-. It's not an A+, it's not an A, but it's not in the B category. It's an A-, room for improvement, but I still think it is far greater than the average internet article would tell you it is.
Yeah.
So for me, my final letter grade for my final letter grade for Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, is going to be a B-. I do believe that it is above average, and I do believe that it is a good film, a decent film. There are stronger offerings in the franchise, but I also believe that it did meet many of its basic tenets and that it was able to overcome a lot of the problems that could have presented themselves in the fashion that 7 and 8 led things to 9.
Nice. All right. I will wrap this up. I as well will give it an A-, just because I think it was a good film. I do think it was a good film. It was enjoyable. You can sit down, enjoy the film. If you try to delve into the holes that we pointed out, you try to delve into the depth of the Force and the living Force and so on and so forth, you can kind of get lost in those things and scratch your head. But to sit down and enjoy it as a film and what it was designed to be was entertainment, I think they did a good job with that. That is one quote that I am grateful that George Lucas put out there. Is basically, you can get as upset or excited about films out there. It doesn't matter. It's entertainment. It's there for you to enjoy, good or negative. Go out and enjoy that entertainment. Take your own opinions, make your own opinions, and enjoy the film for what it is. It is a good film, whether you like it or dislike it. So with that said, we will be doing another episode soon. We'll be talking about the final 4 episodes of The Mandalorian and all the epic awesomeness that showed up in there, including the weird R2 unit that freaks my stepson out.
Me too.
We'll talk about and maybe theorize about some connections that lead back to Star Wars Rebels and the Clone Wars, because we definitely see a lot of cool stuff from Clone Wars that happens in that film or TV series, as well as maybe a part 2 to this. And I would love to talk maybe some theories and some input about Rey's new lightsaber that we see at the end of Rise of Skywalker, and maybe where the future will be for the Star Wars Saga, or not Saga, series, excuse me, because I do know on February 21st, we start seeing the final season of Clone Wars, and it looks like it may be overlapping a little bit with episode 3. Revenge of the Sith. So that'll be interesting how they pull that off. So, all right, folks. Well, with that said, please email us. Let us know your thoughts. Comment on the show. We'd love to hear what you would like to hear this year, whether it is more Star Wars, whether it's gaming, because, hey, all 3 of us are huge gaming nuts. I have an entire walk-in closet full of games, and I'm sure Alton has an entire wall of games.
Slander.
and I'm sure Krebs has much more as well. So with that said, we'll catch you next time. We'll see you.
And hey, Internet, until next time, be epic, don't suck.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Dungeon Crawler.